Good evening, everyone. Thank you for being here with us for Northshire Presents. My name is Rachel Person. For those of you who don't know me, I am the event manager for Northshire Bookstore in Saratoga Springs, New York. Here, as I so often am these days, with my friend and colleague, Davith Wood, event manager for Northshire Bookstore in Manchester, Vermont. Davith is going to get us started by introducing our guest in just a moment. But before we do, just a couple of quick notes. First of all, please use the Q&A box for any questions that you have this evening. You will find that at the bottom of your screen. You can put questions in at any time and we will save them up for later on in the evening when we have the audience Q&A at the end of the event. And then last of all, before we get started, a word of thanks. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you for supporting debut authors and independent bookselling. And thank you for your incredible loyalty and support to Northshire Bookstore. It's been a rough couple of years in indie bookstore world, and we couldn't have gotten through without you. Thank you so much for that incredible support. Davith, why don't you take it away and introduce our guest tonight?
Thanks, Rachel. I am so pleased to welcome Julia May Jonas here this evening to talk about her debut novel, Vladimir. She is a playwright and teaches theater at Skidmore College. Vladimir was chosen as an Indie Next selection by booksellers around the country. The New York Times call it delightful, cathartic, devious, and terrifically entertaining. She is joined tonight by Adelle Waldman, whose novel The Love Affairs of Nathaniel P. was a national bestseller, named a Best Book of the Year by The New Yorker, NPR, Slate, The Economist, Cosmopolitan, Elle, BuzzFeed, and many others, and was both a New York Times Editor's Choice and a Washington Post notable book. Please join me in welcoming them both to our screens this evening. Julia, why don't you start us off with a reading?
Thank you. I'm going to start us off at an early part of the book when our narrator is recounting an encounter that she had with a group of students in regards to the accusations that have been levied against her husband. And so I'm just going to start in the middle of the scene and we can go from there. However, when the wave of accusations and the petition came, I found that suddenly everyone knew that I was the wife of the disgraced chair. Toward the end of the spring semester, I was sitting in my office when a group of 5 young women from my adaptations class entered, giggling with what was clearly their own sense of self-importance and buoyed up enthusiasm they had roused in whatever cabal they'd had before. I invited them in, and they exchanged daring glances until Casey, clad in a flowered baby doll and lace stockings with a Japanime hairstyle, 2 buns, one on each side of her head, a girl who would attach a pen cap to the fat bottom part of her lip during class and accidentally pull her shirt down so that one nipple was exposed, a girl who always laughed too loudly at anything the one very handsome boy said in class, stepped forward. "We wanted to talk to you, she said. "Okay," I said. They were already annoying me. They were an annoying bunch. Individually, I'm able to drum up most of the time a sense of patience and tolerance for each student, even the extremely grating ones. I don't know what happens in one's youth to make one student so tolerable, so pleasant, so secure in themselves, so eager to learn, and what makes other students so irritating. But I pride myself on not discriminating against them because of it. With most of my students, I'm able to understand their need to be seen, and I'm able to focus on that need and let their tics and blips, their entitlements, their insecurities or overconfidences simply wash past. I'm able to see them in progress and to know them in progress, to know that they don't yet fully grasp what they are presenting to the world as they present it. But if even irritating students can be withstood individually, and pleasant students can be excellent company, students in groups are always awful. They get too much bravery from each other, they forget to behave well. The interaction with this group led by Manic Pixie Casey was bound to be painful. Well, we just wanted to say, Becca, a tall girl who took her emotions as seriously as cancer, wearing a baggy turtleneck over a baggy dress over baggy pants. Joke, how do you get into a hippie's pants? Take off her skirt first. Stepped up. Well, we just wanted to say, like, you don't have to, like, do the whole supportive silent wife thing. I breathed in, white-hot anger rushing up my forearms into my elbows. Then Tabitha, in her mechanic's jumpsuit, worn unbuttoned to the waist so that her bra was visible, stepped forward. Like you're this hot, brilliant lady. We think you're really hot. I could tell they prized their own opinion of my hotness, their ability to appreciate hotness in an older woman. And like, it is totally unfair what he's done to us. You? I asked. Us women, she said. Ah, I said, not you personally. Casey stepped forward again. We just want to know when you're going to dump his ass. 'Cause you should, someone in the chorus piped up. Careful, 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 I thought to myself. Careful. We professors talked about it all the time. Nowadays, you must be so careful. It's good, we would say to each other. It's good that there's safety. Though we all wondered what we were preparing these students for with all our carefulness, as if the world was going to continue being as careful. But then again, maybe it was, we would say. Maybe if these were the people who were in the world, who were comprising the professional culture, then the world would have no choice except to be more careful, and that would be a good thing. People said this crop of youth was weak, but we knew differently. We knew they were so strong, so much stronger than us, and equipped with better weapons, more effective tactics. They brought us to our knees with their softness, their consistent demand for the consideration of their feelings, the way they could change all we thought would stay the same for the rest of our lives, be it stripping naked for male directors in undergraduate productions of the Bacchae, ignoring racist statements and supposedly great works of literature, or working for less when others were paid more. They had changed all that we hadn't been able to, and our only defense was to call them soft. They had God and their friends and the internet on their side. And perhaps they would make a better world for themselves. Their aim was not to break taboos the way people born 10 to 20 years before me, and in a small way my generation had done. No, they worked in a subtler and stricter way. And perhaps it had to be so, and so careful, I told myself. No anger, no personal attacks, just grace, grace, grace. The girl stood nervously in front of me, waiting for my response. I cultivated warmth in my chest and brought it up to my face. I pushed the warmth through my smile, letting it settle around my eyes. I want to thank you for coming to see me. I'm flattered on 2 accounts, for calling me a hot lady and for the care that you're extending toward me. It makes me feel hopeful for the future to be surrounded by young women who are as passionate and empathetic as you are. Sit down, I urged them, and they crammed onto the couch in its arms facing me. We all live and work within structures and institutions, I told them. We can't help it. I live inside of institutional sexism, racism, and homo and transphobia, for example. And the difficult thing to understand about these institutions is that we all, however aware of it we are or not, practice sexism, racism, and homo or transphobia, even if we are female, a person of color, or homosexual, or a trans person. And so I'm fully willing to admit that my remaining with my husband, not standing by his actions necessarily, but simply remaining in relationship to him, may be a product of my own internalized sexism. Certainly, how could it not be? Right, said Casey, a band of saliva visible in her open mouth. That said, and I say this again with such deep gratitude for the care you've extended toward me, that my husband and I have had a life together longer than any of you have been alive. And we've had agreements and arrangements and compromises throughout that time, and challenges. We're now faced with another challenge, both a public challenge and a private challenge. I know that you will understand if I beg for your understanding in respect of my privacy, as I decide for myself, as a hot, brilliant lady, how I will handle my marriage of 30 years. Extending me that courtesy is an act of feminism in and of itself. 10 minutes later, I closed the door to my office, waving and blowing kisses as they beamed at me. Assholes, I thought.
I love that. I love what a perfect place to stop. It just gets to the dual register of that is typical, that scene and so much of the book. So I'm going to step back and just thank everyone for being here. Thank Julia for doing this event, and Bookstore for hosting us, and everyone for watching. I can't tell you how excited I am to do this event. I have, in preparation for this, I watched a couple other conversations Julia has done in the past week, because there's so much interest in this book. And I've noticed they all start the same way. There's a moderator like me who starts off by saying something exactly like what I'm about to say, which is, I got Vladimir when it was sent to me by Julia's editor, and I saw the cover. It was amazing. It's like, this looks cool. But I put it on my desk. I have a lot of books on my desk. And then a few weeks later, I saw a friend, another writer, Joanna Rakoff, and I was at her house. I saw her copy of Vladimir. I said, oh, I got that book too. And Julia was like, no, Julia, Joanna was like, oh, you're going to love this. It's amazing. So I got home and immediately started reading it. And after about 25 pages, I was like, oh my God, this is amazing. And so ever since that moment, which was in the fall, I have been really eager to talk to you, Julia, about this amazing book. So I'm so thrilled. And so, yeah, so I wonder if we can go back. I wonder if the people who are watching, if we were in person, of course, we could ask them how many of them have read the book, and that's why they're here. How many are just curious? But I wonder if we could start for people who haven't yet read it to just help get them grounded. Maybe we could talk about just who the narrator of the book is. What is her situation in life, personally, professionally, artistically?
Sure. Yes. So our narrator is a 58-year-old English professor at a small liberal arts college. And when the book opens, her husband is being investigated for a slew of accusations about past relationships with students. And to call them accusations is a bit of a misnomer because they happened. They were real relationships with students that were at the time seemingly consensual, and the women were of age, but are being reviewed at this point. And so he is being brought up for a Title IX investigation in front of the college. That's where we start. And then the narrator in the first chapter of the book meets Vladimir Vladinsky, who is her new colleague. He's a 40-year-old experimental novelist. And she falls into a kind of obsession with him with disastrous consequences.
I wonder if we can step back. Julia and I have corresponded a little bit over email, so this won't be a surprise to her. But I have to say, everyone watching, I love this narrator. I guess there are times when you might say there's an unreliable narrator. I might be an unreliable reader because I was so taken with the narrator that I might have been seduced by her own blind spot. So I will warn everyone, and Julia should feel free to correct me for my poor reading because I'm too easily seduced. But just so we can get a broader picture of her apart from her husband and what she's facing at the moment, I wonder if you just talk about what else she is.
Yeah, she's also a writer. She's written 2 books, although it's been 15 years since she's published her second novel, which was met with kind of fell into obscurity immediately. And she is the mother of Sid, who is her adult daughter, who I believe is 29, who is a lawyer working for a kind of legal organization similar to the ACLU. Yeah.
Right, and I think something that I think comes through in the passage you read, but there's so much going on. I think she's also a very good teacher. Her classes are oversubscribed. Her students love her. She's very diligent. She cares about her students in spite of also being capable of judging them, who isn't capable of operating on both registers at the same time.
Yeah, I think she gives a lot of credence to her students. I mean, I think it's interesting because I think sometimes the book gets characterized as like an exorciation of, I'm not sure if I said that word right, but it's a tricky one.
Yes.
But as a kind of damning treatise about her opinions about her students. And in some way, that's what that passage that I read leaves us with. But she's really in process. She's in process about them, and she really deeply cares about them. And I think she is fundamentally very impressed by them, and impressed by their power and their diligence and their passion.
And I think her students like her, like that we're I guess talking about a person who I think who is more than the allegations brought against her husband. She's sort of has a lot going on in her life interpersonally, I would say, in certain ways that I mean, I think one is capable of having mixed feelings about one's students, but also being a good teacher. Again, maybe I'm too partial and I just want to defend her. But
Well, I think, the whole book is about, someone going through a shift. So I think, I think she is, I think her back is maybe up against the wall more, I think, when the book starts and as it proceeds, than she would have necessarily been if you had caught her at the spring semester prior to this. And
Sure,
I agree. I think she is a good teacher, and I think she's a charismatic teacher. And I think she cares deeply about teaching and about being an educator.
And then I wonder if we could talk a little bit about her marriage and her husband. And again, I think just for people who haven't read the book, that the book, I think, does such a good job of letting us know that there's a lot more here than these allegations. It's one of the reasons I was so seduced by the narrator, is how fully she's rendered. And I think something I'd love to talk about more later is how well you render the quotidian details of life, of having work, family balance, concerns about diet, with these very profound thoughts about gender and relationships. And so I want people who are watching to get the sense of that this isn't a book just about sexual assault allegations. It's a book about very well rendered characters. So anyway, long way of saying I'd like to hear more about this John guy. His name is John.
Yeah, I mean, he and she have had an open relationship since the beginning of the book, and I think of him as being also an extremely charismatic teacher, and the two of them really prizing both their independence from each other, but also the duo that they made for that they were able to present to the world. And I think their independence and their open marriage has all been part of that. I think both of them set out wanting to live differently, in a way. And I think the narrator is also kind of testing about how much she actually was able to live differently. She made this choice to have this open marriage. And for her, I think that has always been something that she's prized as a testament to her independence and her independent thinking. I mean, and I think also, there's this other side, which is for women of her generation. I think there was much more pressure to present yourself completely divorced from your personal life. So I think that has always been something that she's really prided herself on, being not associated with John, and not even associated necessarily with motherhood, that those things were very separate from her professional identity. And I think she felt like is maybe even a misnomer, she had to keep those things very separate in order to be considered seriously as a professor and an academic and a writer.
Right. Do you think, and I think too, without giving too much away, because all this is presented very early in the book, which again is one of the things I think is really neat about the book, that we learn a great deal of what the actual situation is, probably within the first 25 pages. We meet Vladimir, the young professor that our narrator will fall in love with. We learn about what's going on in terms of John, the allegations against John. We learned so much in the beginning, but that only whets our appetite for more. Just wanting to know more about their lives, more about their feelings. But one of the things I have to say that I almost probably, the first time I read the book, glossed over, and then it jumped out to me the second time. That I think when I was reading it the first time, I was so seduced by, I should say, the narrator has such a crisp, intelligent, crystalline voice. And I keep calling her the narrator because Julia she's not named in the book. It's not just that I've forgotten her name, but which is conceivable, but not in this case. But her voice is so compelling, so smart, and so anyway, this time I was reading, and I really paid attention when on page 25 she refers to the fact that John hit her one time when he was drunk, and this was in a context that I think is especially, I mean, there's no context in which that would be okay, but it's especially telling. She's just published her second novel, and John, who is a very successful academic, has not himself published for a general audience. So she's done something that he hasn't, that she's maybe threatened his sense of being the more successful one in the marriage. And, I gasped when I read that this time. And I couldn't believe how much I'd missed it the first time because I was so invested in, gosh, she is so cool. I just want to be her. And I'm just like, wow, that is quite a thing to forgive your husband for or just get past. And I think it's part of the genius of the book is that there's so much here that one can miss, just as one can miss anyone's own life, because we have these blind spots and we are seduced, whether it's by the stories we tell ourselves and the image we want to present to the world, and by what other people are doing. I started out with a question. Shoot. How did you balance what you must have seen as the writer, some of the more sinister qualities in this marriage, with the way that the narrator could see it or have seen it until recently as a reasonable compromise? You can't have everything in life, and this is as good as, a reasonable compromise.
Yeah, I mean, I think the interesting thing about that, as you were talking about it, that I considered is that she is, this book, in a way, she's presenting herself to the reader, right? It has almost like I have a playwriting background, and it has almost the quality of a very long monologue. And so there are these moments when truth, like the fact that John hit her, can slip in this way that she can kind of push to the side, because she's attempting to present, even as little truths kind of slip in, or, you can see as a reader through the translucency of the voice, that there's more darkness, that there's more suffering. And I think partly partly some of that is intuitive. You're writing and you're thinking about how this woman is discussing her life and what their relationship is. And I certainly always had some idea in my mind of John being an extremely angry man occasionally, and how that was part of their relationship and something she had to deal with, and just anger being his anger being a powerful force, and potentially also a reason that she wants her space, potentially also a reason that the open marriage idea appeals to her, is just a sense of distance with this husband. And I think she also, I don't mean to always chalk everything up to a certain generation, and maybe I just mean a certain generation of certain women that I've been in conversation with or have known throughout my life, has this sense of armor and pride about herself as being someone who survives things, who gets through things, and she has the strength of her mind. She can rely on the strength of her mind. That's the thing that's gotten her out of, that's gotten her through her entire life. And so it makes it, both dangerous but true, that these dark things can come up and she can acknowledge them, but there's something about, at least in the way she's presenting the story right now, that she doesn't let it, she can't let it take over. She feels like she needs to move forward.
Right. And it's such an interesting tension, because I think one of the things that is seductive about the voice, and seductive isn't the right word, that almost feels to me reductive or what I'm getting at, but it's so powerful about the voice. There's elements of it that feel like there's such truth telling. There are ways I know for a fact that I'm not the only one who just gasped at certain sentences, because it's like, this could be taken from my life and the life of so many women I know, but we just never put it into words this way before. Just little things like, and I mentioned earlier, I love the mix of the quotidian and the profound, but there's a moment where she just talks about how she stopped cooking. Once her daughter went to college, she stopped cooking dinner every night. And it was such a relief, because every day around noon, she'd have a tick in her brain about what are we going to have for dinner tonight, and just worry about it. And then know that John was not worried about it. And then she'd resent him for being oblivious, and he'd resent her for her resentment. And I was like, how is Julia May Jonas in my marriage? But it's an interesting combination of, she's so attuned to how gender plays out in her own life, or in her day-to-day life, and in that of others. She becomes, I think this is very charming, very embarrassed when she instructs her husband to send a text to Vladimir that says that Vladimir's wife should contact her to discuss arrangements. They're getting together, and Vladimir's wife should send her text so they could talk about the food, because like she's just assumed, oh, the wives will get together on the food. And when Vladimir himself responds, she realizes she feels exposed in having made this reductive assumption, which I feel like, again, is so relatable. But it's just this interesting tension, because I'm reading her as someone who's revealing to me gender inequity in all sorts of ways. And then at the same time, she is herself, one feels increasingly much more than an observer of inequity, but I don't want to say victim of it, but she's as affected by it and blind to it in certain ways as anyone else. Yes, I think that the combination of how smart, how much she sees and how much she doesn't see is probably one of the really most striking things. And how it's, as the reader, you read the book and you feel seen, and you feel like you're seeing your own life while you're observing things that she doesn't necessarily observe. What do you think, what was it for her with Vladimir, as anyone who's seen the cover of the book, is deficit? I mean, I feel like he's presented, the cover is so true to the book in that he's presented very attractively, and not physically, I mean, not only physically, but he comes across as a genuinely smart, interesting, thoughtful, considerate character, I think, as does his wife, as does, in a way, almost everyone in this book, which is, again, part of his power. This isn't a book with villains. I mean, I'm not trying to let John off the hook for what he's done, but what is it about Vladimir that you feel that the narrator sees, or what is she so taken with?
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, and I think it plays into the points that you were making before about, you know, I think throughout my past work as a playwright and also in this work, I've just always been so fascinated in the idea of like the way socialization works on us, despite the fact that we're aware that we are socialized and that we wish we could make a different choice. And so that tension, I think, is always present in the narrator. Like she's so aware that her vanity, you know, makes her feel so banal, and that, how can I be the person to care about food? And yet, you know, there doesn't seem to be a way necessarily outside of that. And I think that plays into her relationship with Vladimir, because I think she, you know, he's in many ways free of all the things that she's really bound by. You know, he's young, he is celebrated. He kind of embodies, I think, this kind of freedom that she wishes she had. And I think the way that she can interpret, you know, her real jealousy and envy of him is to turn it into lust. You know, and in that way, that is kind of her socialization working on her. She doesn't know how to just fully admit that she wants to necessarily be this man. And so, you know, the answer is she wants to possess him, or that's the way she can understand all of the energy coursing through her body, because he does, you know, he does inspire her to write. He opens up things inside of her. That feeling, that energy opens things up inside of her. And I think that also is what is so addicting to her. It's not necessarily Vladimir himself, but it's, you know, what the fantasy of both having him and being him allows her, you know. And it's like, it is that plane. I mean, it's like, it's in a way, it's like working on a book. It's also like having an enormous crush, but it's like, if you have those things, I mean, she has both of them throughout the book, you can go about your life, but your life just takes on this whole elevated form, you know, because you've got this other thing that's kind of operating all the time that you can rest your fantasies in, or rest your thoughts in, or have your company with. And so I think it's like there's him, and you know, like you said, she has blocks to her perception. She can't really necessarily see him clearly. I mean, it's really impossible for basically anyone to see anyone else clearly in general, but especially with him. But it's it's like once she gets that feeling, I think that's the thing that is kind of perpetuating her throughout, and perpetuating her obsession, and that's what pushes her. That's why she can't let it go. Yeah, because if it was just about wanting him, I think it would be a lot easier for her to rationalize.
Right. I think it's such a neat thing that as a character that I think Vladimir is very likable. He does seem like a genuinely thoughtful, intelligent person. I think so the reader can both see why he might be attractive without themselves, I think, sharing the narrator's feeling. Like here, I think you get to sort of watch her falling into something, I think, or at least this reader did, where you could sort of appreciate some of the reasons why without totally well, with also a feeling of dread, a sense that it might not be going in the best direction. But I think it's an interesting thing. I think that we're sort of primed in books to expect a love interest to either be good for the narrator, or bad, like a bad person in some way with some flaw. And I think this is an interesting thing because I think Vladimir as a person is a very separate thing from Vladimir's effect on our narrator. That I don't think he's all that culpable for his effect on the narrator, which is interesting because you kind of want people to be culpable, or
Yeah, I think yes, maybe you want someone to have some agency over what they're doing, but I think, and I think that was in a way, of course, the project of the book, and even before you bring it up, I'll broach the Nabokov question, because it feels applicable, that the main kind of inspiration I took from Lolita, and also his other books. There are many books that I kind of played with inside of this book, but was his prologue, where his famous prologue he writes to Lolita, where he talks about how there's an ape who's imprisoned in a cage, and they give the ape a paper and a paintbrush, and the ape draws the bars of his own cage. And that idea of creating our own imprisonments, and the idea is that Humbert was doing that with Lolita, obviously. And then, and the idea is also that the narrator wants to do that with Vladimir. And I think there's a little bit of a difference, because I think there's a real difference in for this female, because I can't speak for all females, for this narrator, in terms of her desire versus Humbert's, because I think Humbert's is really about possession. He doesn't, really care about how Lolita feels about him. And I think the narrator wants to be seen through Vladimir's eyes. So it's not a one-to-one, I just want this thing, because, as the book unfolds, you find that, she doesn't, the results are irrelevant in a way to her, what happens with him, or they end up being less relevant than you think they're going to be. But it's really about the sense of wanting to be seen anew, and wanting to be seen anew by somebody.
Right. Yeah, and I mean, I guess too, I was so surprised in reading the book how each character is like came on the scene. I just wanted more of them. Vladimir's wife is also a really interesting character. I wonder if you'd mind just talking about her for a minute. I want people to get a sense of sort of the varied cast of really richly textured characters that you get to meet. It's not just sexy hat guy.
Yeah, Cynthia Tong is his wife, and she is a memoirist, and she has a very tragic past, and she is also struggling with her mental health, and at the same time is really probably more ferociously talented than Vladimir is, and is in the process of attempting to adjust to being a new mother and moving out of the city where they came from, and dealing with getting her own mental health in order, so that she can then explode. And I think the narrator has a huge amount of admiration for Cynthia despite herself. And potentially, maybe not so potentially, but I think that Cynthia, also plays into her wanting of Vladimir and her wanting of this inside of this star-studded life. And I don't think to them it feels so star-studded. And I hope that, in reading the book, you understand all of the cracks and fissures in all of the relationships. But I think she also fantasizes about their relationship. And Cynthia is a huge part of that, because Cynthia, unlike herself, seems to her to be very free. And I don't necessarily think that freedom is real. I think Cynthia is a very sad, in many ways, character, even as charismatic as she is. But to the narrator's perception, she seems like this kind of free teacher. She's, she has this kind of swashbuckling relationship to her students and her work and her life. In this way that the narrator feels like she's never been able to do that. She's always kind of been operating inside of the bounds of propriety, as a teacher, as a person on campus, in some ways as a wife, even though they had this arrangement. I still think she says at one point, I still did all the stuff that was expected of me as a wife and mother. Like, we didn't burn it down completely. We made an agreement, but I was still, doing all those things that many women find themselves doing, with scheduling the play dates, making the food, doing the transportation, all of the kind of labor that goes along with these household relationships.
Right. And I totally found it more than possible that the narrator was all right with the arrangement with John, because particularly with John, she did want her space, make the space to write. But I wasn't wholly convinced that she wouldn't have ideally wanted a different marriage where such an arrangement wouldn't have been preferable to not having such an arrangement. And throughout the book, we learn a little about that there was one affair that she had that had become serious, and where they were on the verge of leaving their partners for each other. And I think that's another understated tragedy in her life as she sees it, that she, understated in that she is very stoic when she talks about it, but one gets the sense there was a lot of pain and disappointment there.
Yeah, I think I think I tend to think of her as someone who has to, who both feels those things and has, to say stoical, or I think she has a sense of having to move on, that she has to move on in a certain way. And I think she also she does have the solace of her mind and her intellectual pursuits. And so I think in that way, she can constantly redirect all of that energy back into those things. And I think, it's the flip side of narcissism, is that she's extreme. She believes it's all because, in a way, she thinks it's somewhat all her fault, or she's responsible for it all. She's not going to look at those. I think she looks at those relationships and sees her complicity in it, and feels shame about it. But she feels shame about it because of who she was, not necessarily who the other people were.
Right. But yeah, one of the things I think so much of her psyche is both like a double-edged sword. The things that I most admire about her are also the things that are probably can get her in trouble. The way
Adele, I feel like your sound is cutting out for me.
Oh shoot.
Okay, that's better now. I don't know what happened.
You get closer. I haven't changed anything. I don't know. How's this now?
Now it seems fine. I just missed the last question.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, there was no question. Don't worry. Yeah, I think that so many of the qualities that I most admire in her, you can see that they're sort of double-edged, that the quality of her mind is one where she will take responsibility. She's very unsentimental, and she's unflinching, and she's hard on herself. But while that could be a corrective against a certain type of thinking that blames other people, there is also truth to the fact that sometimes other people are also at fault, that you're not responsible for everything. And so she might miss some of that and I think something similar, one of the things I admired about her is you feel like her life is perfectly curated in the coolest way. Like when I say like a curated life, I feel like one might think of some like cheesy Instagram celebrity. I don't know, but those people don't do anything for me. Like this narrator, I'm like, oh, I want to be like her. House sounds amazing in the coolest way, like not too perfect, just interesting and intellectual. And her, she just seems to have the kind of glamour that I personally really respond to and admire. But then one feels that her devotion to that glamour in itself becomes limiting, that maybe one of the reasons she hasn't divorced John is because she doesn't want to be that single woman who might be on websites looking to date as an older woman that's undignified.
Mhm.
And sort of her devotion to having this a life that looks sort of perfect externally, while enviable, could also be limiting.
Yeah, I think she has, I think it's interesting because I don't think it's necessarily about external perception, although maybe it is in some way, but I think it is about a certain kind of rigidity around what she wants to be, really, what she feels like her standards are for herself, and what she feels like she can permit um inside of those standards. um yeah, it's interesting because I never think of her as being very perfect, but in this certain kind of academic professorial way, yes, she has this, she cooks amazing food, and she has an amazing house full of all sorts of cultural artifacts, and she, is has a certain kind of glamour, as you say, but I think all of it to her feels so muscled in some
Right,
ways,
right.
that she's not able to appreciate that necessarily. She's only able to feel like, she can look at that and see the ways that she continues to fail, which
Right,
is
of
just
course.
what perfectionism is.
Right. Um, did so in the course of the novel, while she is pursuing Vladimir, as you alluded to, she is also writing herself. But we, as the reader, we know a lot about her writing process and how well it's going, but we don't know what she's writing. Did you know what she was writing?
I had an idea about what she was writing, which was about a 1960s commune, and about the kind of politics of the commune, and that there was, a crime happening on the commune. I didn't write any of this out, but I had worked through what I thought the book was, and I think the important thing was that she actually, she wasn't writing about Vladimir, and she wasn't necessarily even writing about the issue of the fall, the romantic fall or the lustful fall. Um, she was writing about something different, but just energized in this
Right.
different kind of way.
And for reasons I don't want to give away, but the book she was writing does not the world does not get to read the book. But would it have been a good book?
Oh gosh, yeah, I think it would have been a good book. I think it would have. I think it had a certain movement to it and a passion inside of it. I tend to think that she says kind of early on when she talks about her writing that she has this sad moment. I think it's sad, of course, as a writer. I think it's the saddest moment where she just says, "My work wasn't good enough," and that's really the truth. And I think that that's the standard that she puts upon herself. But I actually don't think that's true. Obviously, as you know, like publishing and writing books is such a strange thing, and books
Yeah.
hitting or not hitting have very little to do with necessarily the quality of the book. And in a way, if she has any kind of failure as a writer, it's just that she allowed herself to become so
Yeah,
discouraged.
absolutely. I mean, I felt that reading. Yes, as a writer, I felt that so acutely, that how sad it was to take that she internalized the perception of her second novel in the way she did, and then I thought that intersected with John's resentment of it. And she very consciously decided that she was going to take a break from writing to practice being a reader, an admirer of other people's work. And you can see there's something, as there always is, something elegant and dignified about that in her. But it also seems like there's a way in which she was just took what felt to her like the world's rejection very, very hard, and internalized it and turned it into something else that sounded good when she put it in her elegant way, but maybe was camouflaging that maybe that wasn't the best response to a second novel.
Yeah, I think that's very true. And I mean, I think when I think about the response of the second novel and that moment we talked about with John, I think she can rationalize it now in terms of what we did, because we do get over things, I mean, I've had, for my plays, I've had bad reviews and I've kept writing plays. You have to kind of take it in stride and move forward. And you have successes and failures. And if you have a long career as an artist, you realize they really don't have anything to do with you, either your success or your failure. But I think that because of the strife with John at the time, and I think it also had something to do with the affair that you alluded to, where she really did fall in love with somebody earlier in her life. I think it just all feels, it's that moment where she feels like it feels too hard. It feels too hard to kind of struggle uphill, and there's not enough of a reward. And so in her decisive way, she makes this choice to give it up. Right. In a certain way, that she needs to practice humility. And, I mean, that is, to me, something that, to speak in a gendered way, I feel like women are always struggling with, which is, to what extent do I practice humility versus keep, blowing my own horn or pushing my own, cart up the hill, because you need to have some sense, you need to have some ego to keep making work. You need to think you have something to say. And I think just that tension with her about wanting to practice, feeling like she needs to become humble, is at work in that moment when she gives up writing.
Absolutely. And I think, again, it's one of the great achievements of the book, which is I just don't want to minimize this in any way, because I think it's what makes it so compelling to read and just so special, is that I think sometimes in books, the contradictions in characters are their blind spots. You can see them from 10 miles away. And the problem is that if life were that easy, we'd all have such perfect lives. And I think that here, you can see her point of view, and I feel like it's very, very tricky to sort of see what she might be missing, and it's sort of some of the slipperiness of an actual psyche, a very compelling, very powerful, very intelligent one with a very fully realized life. Or this isn't a book that's just about Title IX on campus and Me Too, although that stuff is really well done. I don't want to underplay that, but that you have a fully rendered world and a life where you can see in any given choice, there might be so many factors playing into it, that her marriage is related to her writing, and that's related to why she's in the moment she is, where she's kind of in crisis because something very private and humiliating has become public. Anyway, again, sorry, not a question, just a
no, but I've always been interested or love novels with transparent voices, or I'm sorry, I keep saying transparent, but I mean translucent, where all of a sudden the truths start to slip in and you realize that you're not reading the book necessarily that you thought you were. And so I did, write that out as I was writing Vladimir.
Yeah, can you talk about some of your favorite novels apart from, you've mentioned Nabokov, but otherwise?
Sure. I mean, I'm aware that Rachel and David have come on, but to ask questions. But I think one book that I really thought a lot about in writing this book was The Sea by Iris Murdoch, which is also a book about a transparent voice. that starts in a psychological realm and is really a very deep character study, and then the cracks start to emerge. I think I'm looking at my struggle, and I'm thinking of, I think there's my struggle book too, is my favorite of those, and there's just these moments where Knausgaard just drops a sentence, and you realize just how deeply disturbed this man is, how much he's had to get over. And so even look at, I think I did think about him a little bit in writing this narrator, because there, the way he can kind of, we just drop this portion of truth where you go, oh my gosh, this guy is suffering sincerely. So yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Awesome. Yeah, so I guess you were absolutely right. We should take questions from the audience.
Thank you both so much. The first question here is from Aaron. He says, congrats on the publication of your debut novel. I can't wait to read it. The excerpt you read was awesome. I'm about to embark on a second major revision of my debut novel. How many revisions of Vladimir did you do that you would characterize as major?
Oh, interesting question. I would say, not that many. Not major. I think there was something about Vladimir, and this sounds obnoxious, that unfolded pretty naturally. And I was consistently revising as I was going along, but I'm also a bit, I'm a bit of a stubborn reviser. And so there's been very few things in my life that I've upheaved after I've made it. I've kind of said it either works or it doesn't work. I think Joy Williams has this quote where she talks about how she just revises so much that no one can give her any edits, so that when she sends it in, they just have to accept it. So in this case, the novel worked out, and I don't think that's going to be the case necessarily for my second novel. I think all of these things can happen. A book unfolds how it unfolds. This had a certain kind of energy to it, and that's not to say I didn't rewrite. I mean, I actually look back at the first chapter in whatever the first Word document was, and it's completely different, and I'm shocked at the difference. But I didn't do a huge. I guess when I think of a big revision, I think of a structural revision. I didn't do a structural revision. I worked consistently on the writing, and the moments, but I didn't tear it all apart in the way that sometimes you have to do with a novel.
The next question from the audience comes from Carlin, asking, why did you decide to tackle this story as a novel instead of a play? And how was the experience of switching to a new format?
Yeah, well, I actually had started this as a play back in 2018, and then I put it away because it didn't work. And the reason it didn't work is because it really needed to have the interiority of the narrator. We needed to be inside of her. We needed to be inside of her thoughts. We needed to hear her going back and forth in her mind. We needed to get a sense of her history and how that history was playing into a moment at any one time. And all of those things are basically pretty tiresome for an audience when they're watching a play, or many of those things are. And so because this novel required the nuance that it requires in order to come off, it couldn't be a play in that way. We needed the interiority, and we needed to feel as though almost we were inside of her body, which is one of the reasons she remains unnamed, so that we can feel inside of her, whether we like her or not.
Thanks so much. This is a good segue actually into Susan's second question. She says, in listening to this discussion, it seems fair to conclude that not only can we not truly understand another, we don't know ourselves. Is that thought fair?
Yes, I think that thought is fair and profound. I think at some points we can have realizations about ourselves, and I think at some points we can reach truth with other people. And I think finding out the truth about ourselves is potentially a lifelong project. And also, I mean, I come from a Buddhist background, so I would say there is no self. We're only our actions and movements in the moment. But yes, I would say that is the challenge of clear seeing, and clearly seeing one another is the fact that we're always looking through things through our own particular filters. And sometimes our filters are stronger, and sometimes they're more permeable.
Thank you. We're just about out of time, but we're going to wrap up with a great question that we have from James. He says, I'm halfway through your wonderful book. Would you share with us the spark, the thought, or the event that was the genesis of your idea for this novel? And also what it meant for you to make the shift from being a playwright to a first-time novelist.
Yes. Well, like I said, in 2018, I thought, it was just a little bit of time past the big Harvey Weinstein scandal and so many other, accounts of these prominent men being brought down were coming out. And I thought about the wives and I thought, oh, it'd be interesting to write a play about what's going on in those relationships. And that seemed like a good subject. In a way, I think plays are have to be naturally more subject oriented than necessarily a novel. A novel can be in a way more of a working through a character than I think a play is. And so I thought about that, and then I wrote a bit of the play, and most of it didn't work, but there was this one scene that became the first chapter where the narrator was showing her younger colleague all of her stuff, and there was something about her that I felt like I could explore. I couldn't stop writing, her. It was not a good scene because she just talked the entire time, and her colleague didn't speak at all. So that was really the genesis and the spark. And I remember actually I wrote I wrote something in my notebook about a woman in a burned down cabin holding her husband's human heart in his hand. And none of that takes place and happens in Vladimir at all. However, there was something about the desolation of that image that I thought, I think I can work my way through to that inside of a novel.
Well, Julia, congratulations on Vladimir and all the acclaim it's getting. Adele, thank you so much for joining us tonight. Everyone can order a copy of Vladimir from Northshire Bookstore. And I put the link in the chat. You can find it on northshire.com. Have a wonderful evening, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. And I just wanted to say I'm coming to Northshire in Saratoga to sign books. So if you want a signed copy, I will be happy to provide that.
And those of you who ordered a book with your ticket, your book will be signed on Thursday and then shipped off. So never fear, it is on its way and it will be signed.
All right. Thank you.
Have a great day.
So much.
Thank you, Adele.
It's really fun. Thanks.